Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father-Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how are you doing?
Doing all right.
Third time's the
Groundhog
charm, huh?
Day again.
Yeah. This is our third time trying to start this one. We've realized twice that we missed something in our notes. But the third time, we promise, our notes are 100% perfect. But anyway, we are here today to talk to you. Last week was our big defense episode, Dad. This week is our big offense episode. We are reviewing the end, pretty much our last piece of review, last real episode about the 2023-2024 season as we kind of close the book on that chapter of the Green Bay Packers. A fun chapter, to be sure. It's a chapter with its ups and downs, but a lot of ups, especially for the offense, Dad, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. And a big change as the season went on from where we were, about getting up to the halfway mark. Or
doesn't it feel like an eon ago when we were yelling about how this was maybe one of the worst coach teams we had ever seen in our life, and like they could not do anything right,
and that we had trouble seeing a win anywhere
on the schedule? Yeah,
did this team beat anybody?
I'm so thankful that it feels like forever ago that we lost like however many straight against what was it? You went Lions, Raiders, Broncos, Vikings. Yeah, those four in a row over 5 weeks was a really rough stretch. But Dad, we're not here to talk about a rough stretch. We're here to talk about the 2023 Green Bay Packers offense, which I think gives us all a lot of cause for optimism moving forward. And it was a really good offense this past year, too. Not even just optimism moving forward. It's fun to look back on also. But before we talk about any of that, just wanted to pitch a couple of things. If you like what you hear today, come give us a follow on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. We tweet out when we have new episodes out, stats that we find interesting when we're doing research for these episodes, articles we find interesting from other Packers content creators, pieces of Packers news and notes, whether that's roster moves, coach moves, et cetera, et cetera. Free agency is coming up. We're also going to be super locked in on the draft. We'll be doing mock draft Mondays every single Monday, so keep an eye out on that. We love the draft. We'll be doing an episode a week still for the rest of the season, rest of the offseason. And we'll be doing a lot of focus on the draft, specifically the draft from a Packers lens. So yeah, come give us a follow on Twitter and then come subscribe to us on your podcast platform of choice, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. We even put all our episodes out on YouTube as well. If you want to check us out there, subscribe to us there. It would really help our numbers. But Dad, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's officially close the 2023 season on a high note, talking about the Packers offense, shall we?
Yeah, because the Packers offense was certainly on a high note through that whole second half of the season.
Yeah, I think nothing but
and the numbers bear it out. It's not just green and gold colored glasses.
That was a good one there. But yeah, and especially when you consider the context. So let's just get into it of the fact that this was the cheapest offense in the league this year per Spot Track, and that's with David Bakhtiari's contract included. So even if you include that, they were the cheapest offense in the league, and he only played one game. This is the youngest offense in the league, one of the youngest offenses of all time. I mean, you just look at it, and it's easy to get like a little too far ahead of ourselves, but I think it's definitely something to be optimistic about. And you talk about this being the cheapest offense. Overall in the season, they still ranked 6th by DVOA, fourth by DVOA in passing, 15th by DVOA in rushing. They ranked 4th in EPA per play on offense, 3rd in EPA per dropback, and 10th in EPA per rush. And then they ranked 8th by success rate, 3rd in 10th by dropback success rate, and then 9th by rushing success rate. So any metric you want to look at, this was a top 10 offense pretty much, except for, a little bit on the run side. But all of that with really minimal investment. I mean, we're talking, looking at the premium positions. First-year starter and Jordan Love looks awesome. We'll talk about him in a second. But left tackle's a 7th-round pick in his second year. You got only second-year and first-year receivers. You got only first-year tight ends, really. You got a running back who missed your best running back missed almost the whole season. I mean, they did something. They did a little something with this offense, huh, Dad?
Yeah, I was just looking through the number of players who are still in their rookie contracts, who are starters or big-time players for
almost all of
Green Bay.
Pretty much almost all of them.
The only ones that you got, like Elton.
Jones and Elton, yeah.
Jones and, Bakhtiari, but only played one game.
Yeah, and that's it, really. And I guess you could say Love was not on his rookie deal since he signed that little 2-year.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not quite his rookie deal. But Anyway, speaking of Jordan Love, we're going to go position by position here, Dad. And makes sense to start with the quarterback, right? And we talked about coming into this season, we talked about through the season, the only thing that matters is how Jordan Love plays and an evaluation of Jordan Love. And I would say stamp of success, 10 gold stars, 100 out of 100. This season went as perfectly as you could hope if you were like for a Packers fan in terms of how we feel about Jordan Love now. I mean, if you told someone coming into the season that by the end of the year, he would be getting talked about in top 10 conversations already. He would be, on borderline top 10 list. I saw a list of power rankings for next year, and the Packers were 4th, which we might be getting a little ahead of ourselves, but I'll take it. But Dad, I don't think there's any way you can look at it and not be incredibly excited about Jordan Love's future. And let's just start there.
Yeah. Well, if you just look at how he finished the year, it wasn't just top 10. He was looking top 5.
Yeah, if you only look at the second half of the year, almost all of his metrics are top 5, which is crazy to think about. But if you're looking at his season on the whole, I mean, 4,159 passing yards, 32 touchdowns, and 11 picks in the regular season, so over 17 games. If you look at that compared to Aaron Rodgers' first season over a 17-game pace, so yes, he only played 16 games, but if you extrapolate it out to 17 games, Rodgers threw for more yards on a 17-game pace, 4,290. But fewer touchdowns, 30 touchdowns, and more picks, 14 picks. And then if you look at Brett Favre's first season as a full starter, his second year in Green Bay, and you extrapolate that out to a 17-game pace, he was only at 3,500 yards, 19 touchdowns, and 25 picks. So not great. And like looking at, Jordan Love's numbers on a per game basis, and this is over the whole season, mind you, given like that they started kind of rocky. Or not, the middle was kind of rocky. They started actually really well, but that does help.
Game one looked really good.
Helps to play the Bears. But anyway, per game, it's around 245 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a half a pick. And then if you just look at some of the advanced numbers, this is per RBSDM, we cut off at 50% of quarterbacks, quarterbacks with 50% of dropbacks. His .156 EPA per play was 5th in the league this year. His 47.6% dropback success rate was 13th. And his 1.1% completion percentage over expectation was 14th as well. And that's, including those weeks where the completion percentage over expectation was really bad for like a stretch there from like week 3 to week 6, week 7, or week 2. We'll say week 2 to week 7.
When we were looking at the Packers, numbers, each of those like weeks 3 through 8 in our pregame, it's like, oh, well, Love's doing pretty well in his, EPA per play, but that completion percentage over expected is looking a little rough. And so it's to get up to 14th with kind of starting off.
He was to start the year. It just shows how much he dominated the entire second half of the year. Like he was just kicking ass. Sorry about, anyway, but he was kicking ass. I'm sorry. He was kicking ass. I'm just telling you how it is. PFF grades. I know like these numbers are per PFF
just
at least.
Being honest.
He was you're going to get us copyright stricken if you're not careful. He was the 11th highest graded quarterback per PFF in the regular season. He had 34 big-time throws per PFF. That was the 5th most in the entire league this year. His big-time throw rate was 8th at 5.6%. He had only had 17 turnover-worthy plays. That was the 12th fewest, and a turnover-worthy play percentage of 2.6%, which was the 10th lowest. Average depth of target of 9 yards was the 3rd highest, so he was throwing it down the field at a high clip. And then his 15.2% pressure to sack rate, so that's like essentially the rate at which pressures are converted to sack. That's like the amount. That's like how you quantify essentially how well a quarterback is handling pressures, in my opinion. That was the 7th lowest, and those numbers are all just the regular season. And then he dominated the postseason as well. I know you would say like, okay, the Cowboys game was insane. That was like A+++. And what was it? Nick Wright, I don't know if you know on First Things First on Fox Sports, I think it is, was people were making fun of him because he was like, that's the best playoff game a Packers quarterback has played in 7 or 8 years. And people were clowning him. I'm like, he's right. Like that, like how could it be
that was
better? It's
dominant.
It's not, and it's not even a shot at Rodgers. That's how good a game that was. He was essentially, if the Packers defense holds even a little bit, he would have stayed out of the game with a perfect passer rating, but they made him come back in and miss a pass. That first game though was excellent. He was 16 of 21 for 272 yards, 3 touchdowns, and no interceptions. The second game was not as good. But I will say, I watched it back. There are 3 throws that I think he would want back. There's the one to Kraft that he misses that gets tipped up in the air and is intercepted. That should just be an incomplete pass, though. Like, the fact that it became
some bad luck that his
interception.
off-target throw got tipped into the defender's hands.
Yes.
But it was an off-target throw.
There was the miss to Jones, where you could argue, I would argue he would scramble, but what he said about the throw, I would argue he should have scrambled.
That one.
But what he said was it was more of a miscommunication because he expected Jones to stop and Jones kept going. So that's 2. And then the third is the last play of the game, where it's like, okay, he's trying to make a play, but you can't do that. And he knows that. And we've seen him learn from his mistakes. And in that game, he was 21 of 34 for 194 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks, and also an additional 61 yards of pass interference yards if you want to throw those in as well. I'm just saying, those guys, I'm going to count them because, it would have been completed. They just tackled our guys like half the time. And there were 3 different PIs.
It was so obvious. I mean, some of them were like, you look at it, it's like, oh, yeah, he grabbed him because he had to.
Yeah, because he was just beat.
Because it would have been a touchdown otherwise.
Yeah, and so just looking at his numbers only in the playoffs, these are also per RBSDM. This is amongst 14 quarterbacks who had at least 10 dropbacks in the playoffs. His .397 EPA per play in the playoffs was second amongst all quarterbacks to only Matthew Stafford. His 51.6% dropback success rate was fifth. His 4.2% completion percentage over expectation was fifth. And you could say, yeah, a lot of those numbers are bolstered by just dominating the Cowboys game and being, I would say, average. I would say around average against the Niners. He definitely could have played better, but he also had some really good moments in that game. He had some throws in that game where I had kind of forgotten them. I was like, damn.
Yeah, and when I looked through that, I remember looking through after the game, play by play, to look at his on-target throws. And even though afterward you felt like it wasn't as good, he actually did not have that many that were off target.
Yeah, I would say there's just a few plays in that game where you're like, can't have that one. But for the most, he also made some really awesome throws in that game. If you look at some PFF grades, he was the 7th highest graded quarterback per PFF in the postseason amongst 14 quarterbacks. His 3 big-time throws was 7th. His big-time throw percentage was 5th. He had 1 turnover-worthy play, which was the second fewest, and he took no sacks in the playoffs, despite being pressured 21 times, which I would say is very impressive. That's kind of ridiculous, honestly. Especially in that San Francisco game, they were not blocking Javon Hargrave at all. Like in that kid, they were not blocking Hargrave at all. And then Bosa also kind of had his way on that right tackle spot, especially once Tom went out. But Dad, I think all I have to say about Jordan Love this season is he's the guy. I mean, the only thing I would see for me, so this is a question I have for you as well, is what do you want to see next year? Mine is I would like to see him scramble a little bit more, create with his legs a little bit more. Not like, I'm not talking designed runs. He did well on like some zone rekeepers, but I just think there are moments where he could break the pocket and run, like especially that Jones one. And you see guys like Mahomes do this a lot. You see guys like, I'm not asking him to be Mahomes. That's a ridiculous like request, but EPA per scramble, like scrambles are incredibly valuable. They're more valuable than like a standard drop back even. And he only scrambled once in the playoffs and only 22 times in the regular season, which was 16th. And I think, he could amp that up if he wanted to. And I just think that would be even more playmaking that he'd be able to do. Dad, what were your thoughts? Anything else you wanted to add on what Love did this season or anything that you are looking at going forward? Because I think we both he's the guy. They're gonna extend him this offseason. They're gonna give him a lot of money, and he earned it. He 100% earned it. Yeah,
I felt like for the scrambling that maybe he had been trying to rein it in a little bit and basically overcorrected, and now he needs to go back to when it's open, just take it.
It's all about finding a balance.
Yeah, and you can see, and you mentioned Mahomes. That's what he was doing in the Super Bowl. Like, oh, I've got yards. Just take those 3 yards, especially if you get a first down. Just take that first down.
Yeah. Yep. Anything else you want to see from him going forward? Anything else about this past season?
What would I like to see more than he did in the second half of the year? I'd just like to see him do it the whole year.
That's true. Yeah, just do it. Just start strong next year and continue it the whole year. I think it's like all we want to see. But I mean, he was everything you wanted him to be this year and more, I would say, and a lot more. Like a lot more. Like he was. Could anyone have thought he would have been this good this year? With keep in mind like a pretty inexperienced offensive line, a very inexperienced receiver core, Aaron Jones missing almost all of the games, no running game really to speak of. I mean, the passing game pretty much carried because we talked about
this was the thing before the season. It was like, oh, they're going to lean on the defense
and the running game and the offensive line. It's like, oh, you're not going to have your left tackle or your running back. The running game is going to be bad or bad to average for most of the year until the end of the year. The defense is going to be bad. Like, Jordan, you got this. Carry the team. And he did. He carried the team to the playoffs. Like, and they won a playoff game. And they almost beat
on the road.
They almost beat the Niners. Like,
and the conversation like before the season was about
and
how
they should have beat the Niners. Sorry, I had to add that. Sorry, go ahead.
They had the game. They only needed to make like one or two plays go their way. But you feel like before the season, it was all like, can he just be as good as Rodgers was in 2022?
Yeah. Oh, he was
not even prime. And instead he's like playing like a top 3 quarterback for the second half of the year.
For the second half of the year, and then over the course of the year was like a top 10 quarterback, even if you look at the whole season.
Right. So now we're looking forward to Jordan Love wreck and shop for the next 15 years for the Packers.
I would love to see it. I would love to see it.
King of the NFC North until he rides off to MetLife Stadium.
I was going to say to the Jets. But anyway, we don't need to worry about that yet. That's a little ways down the line. But yeah, no. There's nothing else I really feel the need to add on Jordan Love. We could just talk even more about, I feel like there's nothing else to say. He handled every aspect of it too. On-field play, in terms of, avoiding negative plays for the most part, hitting a lot of big time plays, staying in structure, creating out of structure, avoiding sacks, and then to the intangible
off-platform throws, arm angles in the face of pressure.
The it factor of like, you watch him, you could and the games I forget about, like the game against the Saints in his first ever start at Lambeau. You take him back, come back from 17 down in the second half to win your first ever start at Lambeau. I mean, we should have known that, but just the it factor there. And also the intangibles. I mean, everyone talked about how he was like the leader of the team as the first year starting quarterback. That's not normal. Like, and then you watch him in interviews being the face of the franchise. He's nailing that part. I mean, what more could you want? Like, there's nothing else you could want. But yeah, so Jordan Love, awesome. We love that guy. Pun intended. But anyway, Dad, anything else there? Or do you want to move on to the only thing I have for the other quarterbacks, Sean Clifford? I mean, he looked pretty good in preseason and seems like a solid backup. That's pretty much all I got for that. Like, he had a little bit of mop-up duty in that Vikings game and a little bit of mop-up duty in the Cowboys game, and he looked fine, I guess, is my opinion on him. Anything else on Jordan Love you wanted to say, though? I just figured I'd get into Clifford stuff, too.
Yeah, there's just so little, that we got to see of Clifford because Love was playing all the time.
He looked really good in preseason. So, I mean, that's what you want from a backup, I guess. So, it is what it is.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing you want from the backup is to do a good enough job for your defense to practice against.
And then maybe that's why the defense was bad. We're going to blame that on Clifford? Maybe. But no, yeah, Jordan Love, I mean, A+ season, everything you could have wanted. And you just want to see essentially...
It just makes you excited for the future.
You just want to see take that second half of the season and just keep doing that, whatever you were doing. And the only thing I'm going to say is like, the one thing I want to say about Jordan Love is I feel like when he tries to be too perfect with his mechanics is when he like isn't as good. Just keep slinging that sucker. I don't care about mechanics. Mechanics. Like, just throw it off one foot. Throw it sidearm. Like,
trust your instincts.
Throw it underhand. I don't care. Like, just do whatever you were doing that second half of the year. Just keep doing that. And it was like not great mechanics, like off of 1 foot, jump throw.
A lot of like jump throws, falling backwards.
But I swear he's better when he's doing that than when he's like trying to actually. So just whoever is also quarterback coach, don't tinker. Just let him do his thing. That's fine. Yeah, exactly. But anyway, Dad, I think that's all we really had on quarterback. But let's move on to running back. The Packers, this is pretty much the only place that they really spent much money. They were the 10th highest in full roster cash spending at the running back position in the league. And let's start with Aaron Jones. He played in 11 regular season games and 2 playoff games. He did sustain a hamstring injury in week 1 that really lingered through the middle of the season. It kind of shows in his usage. He essentially came back against Detroit after missing a couple of weeks with that hamstring injury, but only had 5 carries. He then missed another game and had a bye week before coming back against Denver and only had 8 carries there, and then only 7 carries the next week against Minnesota. So essentially through 8 weeks, he really was not healthy with that hamstring injury. He then suffered another injury in week 11, spraining his MCL against the Chargers, which caused him to miss an additional 3 games. So that ended up being the highest percentage of games missed in his career as he now enters his age 29 season. He just turned 29 during this past season.
Yeah, and that injury against the Chargers, the MCL, that looked scary when it happened.
Looked much worse, yes.
It looked much worse than it ended up being.
Yeah, and so it is a bit concerning that he is, 29 years old and had probably the least healthy season of his career, but he did close the season very healthy and strong. He averaged over 19 carries a game across the final 4 regular season games and 2 playoff games as A.J. Dillon dealt with injury. And he ended the season on a streak of 5 straight 100-yard rushing games. So,
which may be a Packers record. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly. It's definitely, I think, the most for him. On the season,
by far.
Yeah, on the season, though, including playoff games, he had 182 carries for 875 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 2 fumbles. So that's 67.3 yards per game. That was 10th in the NFL. And when I'm comparing running backs here, I'm looking at essentially 59 running backs, a subset there, of running backs with at least 20%, with at least 67 carries. And that was chosen because it was 20% of the league leader. 20% is a nice cutoff there. But anyway, 67.3 yards per game was the second highest of his career. It was the 10th in the NFL this season. 4.8 yards per carry was 8th in the NFL amongst that same subset of running backs. It was, however, the 3rd lowest of his career, but over those last 6 games, he did average 5.5 yards per carry, which was much more in line with his usual numbers. So it showed that when he was 100%, he still got it. He had 3.35 yards after contact per attempt on the season. These numbers are per PFF. That was 6th in the NFL, and then it was the second highest of his career. 0.2 missed tackles forced per attempt was 22nd in the NFL. 0.059 EPA per carry ranked 5th in the league amongst those same running backs. And then a 48.6% success rate was 2nd in the league amongst those same running backs. So he was a very efficient running back this year and also had a good mix of explosive runs. In the passing game, he had 34 receptions on 47 targets for 254 yards and a receiving touchdown. 19.5 receiving yards per game was the lowest in the last 5 years of his career, but it was still 17th in the NFL, and he still had 5.4 yards per target, which is around average for his career. So it just mostly showed he was not getting used in the passing game as much as he had previously. He was 31st in the league still in yards per target, and then he easily by every metric you look at had the best playoffs of his career. So, Dad, I think my takeaway from Aaron Jones this season was when he was out there, he looked like Aaron Jones. The only concern is missing this many games a bad omen for going forward? He's going to miss games, or is it going to make him slow down? What do you think about Aaron Jones this year? What do you think? Are you concerned at all with the games missed? What are your thoughts?
So I think we can say that the injuries he had this year did not slow him down, because when he came back, he looked as good as he has. Maybe had the best stretch of play of his entire career. Looked very explosive, big runs, making important plays, finding the hole in the line to run through.
Still got up to I think almost 20 miles an hour on that run against San Francisco. So still some top end speed. It was 19.7, I think, if I remember correctly, something around there per next gen stats. And the only other thing I would say is that I forgot to add is was that massively awesome stretch of play because he didn't have to play as much in the
he had all that rest for a lot of the year, and so he was fresh. His legs were fresh for the playoffs.
Yeah,
which should make you think for next year.
I hate to break it to people who are always like, Matt LaFleur goes away from Aaron Jones. This season is a data point that he might look at and be like, hey, we're going to limit his carries even more next year.
Jones are just going to put you in bubble wrap, open at Christmas.
And I just want people to remember that next year when Jones only has 10 carries in week 2 against whoever. Those games are not as important as the games later in the year. And we saw what happened this year. He looked freaking awesome in the best playoffs of his career by a lot. Previously, honestly, Aaron Jones, his playoff games were pretty disappointing.
They've been kind of rough. Fumbles and not
poor yards per
play.
carry, not as explosive. And even against the Niners in the second half, he wasn't great except for that one run. But still, by far the best playoffs of his career. And it does help that he was playing the Cowboys and he's a Cowboy killer.
Whose number he has
Oh my
on
goodness.
speed dial.
They are so tired of him, I bet, because he just won't stop. He will not stop beating up on them. But yeah, Dad, anything else you wanted to touch on with Aaron Jones?
I just think he's just fun to watch, because of his ability to make something more than what's there. He's getting more than what's blocked for him.
Oh, 100%. And also, everyone talks about him as being like the leader in the locker room, the like life force of the team, the heartbeat of the team. And I think if you asked me like this past offseason if I thought Jones was going to be back next year, and we'll talk about this later, I would have said, probably not. He's coming. They need him back. They need him back desperately. And we're going to talk about that in a bit.
Gutekunst maybe even said something about him. He's being back next year.
Yeah. But speaking of players who, did not do, I would say you could tell how different the run game, like you were saying, was with Aaron Jones out there. Dillon had a tougher year on the ground. He played in 15 regular season games. However, just, the final 2 that he played, he was in a very limited role due to injury and played only a handful of snaps in each of the last 2 games he played. He had a broken thumb against the Giants, which caused him to miss the next game, and then sustained a stinger against Minnesota that knocked him out the rest of the year pretty much. Overall, he had 178 carries for 613 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no fumbles on the year. 40.8 yards per game. That was 38th in the NFL amongst that same set of running backs that we talked about earlier. 50 amongst 59 running backs. That was 30th in the NFL. It was the lowest yards per game since his rookie season for him. 3.44 yards per carry is really rough. It was 53rd amongst those 59 running backs. By far the lowest of his career, and in only 4 of 15 games did he average over 4 yards per carry. So not a good season for Dillon in terms of yards per carry. 2.69 yards after contact per attempt on the season was 42nd amongst those same running backs, so still below average, also by far the lowest of his career. 0.18 missed tackles forced per attempt was 56th amongst those 59 running backs. Negative 0.136 EPA per carry ranked 42nd amongst 59 qualifying running backs. And his 34.3% success rate was also 50th in the league amongst 59 qualifying running backs. Pretty much by any metric you look at with him on the ground, he was one of the worst running backs in the league this year. And part of it has to do with the fact that the Packers' running game was not very good. But is it a chicken or the egg thing, Dad? I mean, was it not good because the line wasn't good? And so Dillon struggled? I mean, when Jones came back, the running game suddenly came to life. So I feel like it's hard to say that it was just the offensive line. I think, this was easily Dillon's worst year by most metrics. And he was a bottom 15, bottom 20, bottom 10 running back in a lot of statistics. Receiving wise, he did, contribute 22 receptions on 27 targets for 223 yards, 14.9 receiving yards per game, and 8.25 yards per target. That 8.25 yards per target was 5th in the NFL amongst running backs. And it's also in line with, his career numbers, but they used him a little more in the passing game, and he caught 22 of 27 targets, which is really awesome. But you just needed more on the ground from him this year, and he was really bad on the ground. 3.44 yards per carry is really bad.
Yeah, I feel like the beginning of the year, the line hadn't really gotten it together somehow, though he wasn't necessarily hitting the right spots, but there weren't holes for him either. But that's the thing, that Jones can do something when it's not really blocked well. I do feel like they tried to get him
Go ahead,
I think they're throwing the ball more because the line was having so much trouble opening up holes. It's like, okay, let's give you the ball on a screen or somewhere so you can get some space to do something.
The run blocking was not very good this year on the season. But like you said, Jones just did more with it. And then for every one of those, like I'm thinking about, I don't want to like just nitpick specific plays, but I'm just thinking about the A.J. Dillon play against the Falcons where he has the hole open and he just falls down like a yard short and just trips. He just slips. Yeah, and then I'm thinking about
the thing. Yeah, go ahead. And I remember thinking about that the year about just his running style. I don't think he gets his feet up off the ground, like kind of slide steps. And so he gets those little trip ups.
He does not get his legs up. He doesn't run with high knees. And that was something that he talked about. I think he was responding to a troll on Twitter, but he was saying like he's been working on that. I know, right? Not one of my many burners. But he was talking about how he's been working on that, but we didn't really see the fruit of those like efforts this season. And it's just shocking to me. Like Andy Herman talked about this. It's like when he gets to the second level, which unfortunately he doesn't very often, even when he gets there, he never makes a guy miss. When he runs a guy over, he goes down with them usually. He's pretty good at carrying a pile. Like that would I would say he is good at. Like if he can keep his feet, he's pretty good at carrying guys, but he doesn't keep his feet enough. There's nothing that he doesn't have a go-to thing is what Andy Herman was saying, and I totally agree with. When he gets to the second level and has a smaller guy and to turn like a 7-yard run into like a 15-yard run, 17-yard run. And I just think, AJ Dillon, the person, is awesome. Mayor of Door County. I think we'll talk about it later, but if they wanted to bring him back and it was a reasonable deal, I would understand it. But I honestly was expecting the numbers to not be this bad. I mean, he's bottom 10 to bottom 15, bottom 20 in almost every metric. And like if he's been that bad, I just don't see a reason to bring him back. I don't know. I was coming in this and I was like, oh, he'll be about like an average running back. He'll be like 30th in most of these, but it was much worse than I expected.
Mostly like bottom quarter.
Yeah.
Of the league.
It's not good. Other running backs the Packers had this year. Anything else you wanted to say on Dillon?
No, I think he just has not quite been what they hoped he would be.
Yeah.
When they drafted him.
When they drafted him, they expected him to be this bruiser who
I think they were hoping for a little beast mode.
Or Derrick Henry.
Henry.
He just doesn't have the same... I don't even know what it is. It's like he doesn't have the same contact balance, I guess, is what I would say. Like,
I think that's one of the things. I think his contact balance isn't quite good enough. So that when he runs into somebody and knocks them over,
he goes down with them almost every time.
Right. He also falls down.
Yeah. Other running backs the Packers had this year, Emmanuel Wilson, he played in 9 games, 26 carries for 121 yards, 4.7 yards per carries. Pretty solid. 1.69 yards after contact per attempt was the worst of the running backs on the team, though. 0.12 missed tackles forced per attempt was the worst of the running backs on the team. Negative 0.235 EPA per carry isn't great, and a 25% success rate also is not great. He had 5 catches on 6 targets for 34 yards. I thought he showed good open field, burst and ability to turn the corner, but the numbers are showing that he needs to find a way to beat a tackler is the main thing that he needs to work on in the offseason if he wants like a role on the team going forward.
Yeah, I think he's was struggling to get through the line at the start.
Yeah. And
so if he didn't get through there, too often he didn't get through there. If he got through there, he did okay. But if that initial contact is kind of usually the play was over.
Yeah. Patrick Taylor, then, the last of the running backs that really played a significant number of snaps for the Packers. Played in 13 games for Green Bay, 35 carries for 147 yards, 4.2 yards per carry, 2.89 yards after contact per attempt is, solid. 0.26 missed tackles forced per attempt was actually the best of the running backs on the team. Negative 0.147 EPA per carry, though, and just a 37.1% success rate. Just so you know, the first half of those were from PFF and the second half were from RBSDM, just so you know. And then NFL Fast Star as well. 11 catches on 17 targets for 49 yards. Just 2.88 yards per target is not great. I thought he played fine. They seemed hesitant to actually give him carries, though. They kept bringing in guys and like Kenyon Drake for a game, and then James Robinson for a game, and then Emmanuel Wilson at the end. And I was like, okay, so you guys just
then Wilson got hurt. It's like, okay, can we get him back onto the team again after he went with the Patriots?
You mean Patrick Taylor did? Yeah. But yeah, so I don't.
The other thing I'd say that you did see them do, third down, passing situations, hurry up. They had him in there instead of Dillon.
That was only really one game though.
While Jones was out, Jones was missing games.
Yeah, I remember that. It was really only I'm having trouble remembering which game it was, but I remember that it happened and we're like, oh, like, are they gonna is that gonna be something they're gonna do? Going, nope. They kind of just did it for a game and then stopped doing it.
But
I thought Patrick Taylor was fine.
Yeah, and I think they trusted his pass pro
protection. Yeah, but then suddenly they didn't and stopped playing him. I don't know. It was kind of odd. His usage was weird this year. I thought they were going to use him more. But Dad, that's kind of it for the running backs. Anything else you wanted to add on there? Or do you want to move on to the tight ends?
No, I don't think we need to really add anything on it. I expect we're going to see some change in the running back room.
I think it's definitely a need for the team. 100%.
I think it's time they're gonna. I don't think there's any point in signing a free agent.
No, there never is. I mean, I'm telling you, there never is.
Draft one or two.
Yeah, I think so, 100%. And we'll talk about that at the end when we talk about players that we think are coming back or players that we think are leaving. But, Dad, do you want to move on to the tight ends?
Sure. Let's move on to tight ends. This is another kind of bargain group. 23rd in the league in cash spending for the year on tight ends. I'll start with not the player we would have started with halfway through the year, but I'm starting with Tucker Kraft.
Okay.
And he actually led the group in snaps. So using that 723 snaps. He had a little bit of pass blocking, 45 pass blocking snaps, and 326 run blocking snaps. He caught 36 of his 48 targets, so 75%, for 379 yards and only 2 drops. If you look like from week 13 to week 18, his PFF grade was 17 points higher than weeks 1 through 12, showing how much he improved.
It's funny
during the season,
because I've seen a ton of different people on Twitter, like film breakdown people, being like, Tucker Kraft, the first 5 weeks, had no idea what he was doing out there.
Right.
Like, he was just running around out there.
He was the invisible man. It's like, oh man, I guess we lost another third round pick down the drain. And then after Musgrave got hurt, then Kraft came in, and all of a sudden he was doing everything.
Kraft
doing
came
all
in,
the
and I was
stuff
like,
that.
Go ahead.
We thought he could do that Musgrave couldn't, in terms of
running in a straight line without falling over. No offense
and knocking
to Musgrave,
people over and staying on his feet. For the season, he ran around on 84.6% of his pass plays. He tied for the league lead in yards after catch per reception in the regular season with David Njoku at 7.5 yards.
Let's go with Tucker Kraft. I mean, that's a skill set he has. Like, watching him play, I was like, that's the thing, like you were saying, like, and he himself said that, I think watching the tape at the beginning of the year, he was like embarrassed because it was so bad. And
yeah,
I think coaches talked about how stunned they were that he was able to improve this much over the course of one season. I mean,
right. Because you should say it takes like a couple years. But this was something that we both talked about looking at his tape in college. Like, oh, this guy could be a yak monster.
Yeah.
He'd run over people and staying on his feet. In the regular season, he was 4th in the league among tight ends in passer rating when targeted. He was also in the regular season 3rd in the league in DVOA among tight ends with at least 30 targets, behind only George Kittle and Isaiah Likely. He kind of had an intermediate or low average depth of target, so he wasn't being thrown downfield so much, only 4.9. Interestingly, he and Musgrave tied with 10.5 yards per reception for 14th in the league among tight ends with at least 30 targets. There are 43 qualifiers, but in different ways.
Yeah, very different ways. Very, very different players. I don't think you could have 2 players that are more different, to be honest.
Yeah, and in terms of where he was lining up, he had his highest usage in line at 66%, then slot at about 24%, and out wide at 10%. Of the tight ends on the team, he was the best pass blocker of the group by PFF grade with a 70.3, which put him at 21st of the 71 tight ends with at least 15 pass blocking reps.
Okay, so top third.
He did, however, have the lowest run blocking grade of the Packer tight ends at 48.7.
That's kind of surprising. I was expecting
not that any of them were really great. The other ones were all still only in the upper 50s.
Okay,
but he was the worst of the lot.
That's
so none of them were great, and he was the worst of a middling to poor group of run blocking tight ends. Then moving on to anything more you want to say about Kraft?
Yeah, I just think Kraft. He's a guy. Now here's a guy. I'm doing the Chris Collins again, but he's a guy who I think we were. What's the word I'm looking for? We were excited about him, and then nervous about him, and then excited about him again. It was kind of an interesting, up and down for him, because, and it got to the point where I was like, ooh, it's like maybe this just isn't the year for Tucker Kraft. And then by like week 12, I was like, Tucker Kraft might be better than Luke Musgrave. Like he might be the tight end one on this team. And now I'm just like, okay, we're just going to run a lot of 2 tight end stuff because that sounds fun. I mean, it's just an embarrassment of riches in terms of like weapons on this team. And we're going to talk about the receivers later.
The rookie pass catchers hit on this year's draft is kind of insane.
Do you think this is blind luck? Or do you think this is replicable? Like, is this something where people are going to be like,
obviously not replicable? Doesn't matter how good you are at it.
You don't think so? Where it's
no,
like,
you're not getting whatever 4 to 4 pass catchers all being.
I'm not
really
talking
high
about
efficiency
hitting all of them. I'm talking about like if you have a bunch of rookies together. Are they all going to peak at the end of the year? I don't know. Maybe I'm just, you know.
I mean, they were thrown into the fire and had to get more reps and on-field.
And they looked like they were thrown into the fire for about 5 or 6 weeks. I mean, we had guys just running the wrong routes for 7 weeks there.
I thought you meant, was the drafting part of it replicable, as opposed to the
no,
you let them all play a lot in the first half of the year replicable.
No, I meant to let them all. Like, is that a thing that you think other teams might try and do? I don't know. But no, I didn't have anything else on Kraft. I'm guessing you're going to Musgrave second, unless you're really spinning something up here and going to Sims and then Musgrave for some reason.
I decided to go chalk here, Musgrave. So he started off like looking, even in the preseason, looking really good. It's like this really fast. He moves great. He had 502 snaps, about a third of them as a blocker rather than going out on a route. He did miss 6 games with a lacerated kidney, which yuck.
Okay, Dad, he missed only 6 games with a lacerated kidney is what I'm going to say.
It was true that when that first happened, it's like, oh, he could be out for the year. This is like what happened to Keenan Allen.
Keenan Allen also.
Where I don't know if it happened the same way, but at first I remember hearing it was like,
although I think Witten's might have been a spleen, if I remember correctly now, actually. But anyway, lacerated organ does not sound fun. No, thank you.
No, when you're having like internal hemorrhaging,
that's not a good thing. That's not good. But anyway, Continue with Luke Musgrave.
So he caught 40 of his 52 targets, so about 77% for 418 yards. He was 7th in the league among tight ends in passer rating when targeted in the for this regular season plus the postseason. It was regular season only. He was only 15th out of.
That's what happens when they call Y leak and you're wide open for like a 70-yard touchdown.
He ran a route on almost 89% of his passing snaps. He mostly he if you compare him to Kraft, he lined up a little bit more in the slot and a little less in line.
And which is kind of what we expected for him coming out.
And he was more of a downfield threat than Kraft, with an average depth of target of 7.4 compared to Kraft's 4.9. Mm-hmm. And Musgrave was 15th in the league among tight ends with at least 30 targets in that depth of target.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of how you like to see him being used going forward, because I saw Musgrave, take that little like tight end come across the formation and get the dump off, and he did nicely a couple times to like turn that upfield and beat the guy to the edge. But he just doesn't have the same tackle breaking ability that Kraft does with the ball. He doesn't have the same run after catch ability that Kraft does with the ball in his hands. So I would love to see, Kraft on those little tight end screens that they hit him on a couple times. I think he had a touchdown there against Tampa.
Hurdling people,
running with getting little dump offs and running with the ball. Like the thing that they run to Kittle all the time for San Francisco, where he just comes across the line and like pretends to block the edge and then just slips out. They dump it off on a rollout and he just runs and runs and runs and breaks 3 tackles and gets like 20, 30 yards. And then Musgrave, I saw Musgrave beat Derwin James on a no frills out route, like a regular receiver at whatever the hell 6'7", like 250 he is. And I was like, yeah, he can play. That was pretty cool. And I think that actually was the play that he burst his kidney on. But anyway, sorry.
Oh, continue. Right. He fell on the sideline. And then he had the plays up the middle of the seam when he's, running through the defense, getting open.
It's funny that the main thing with Musgrave is he needs to work on his contact balance, and I think it's kind of a funny, like, the team knows it too, because first play of the year, or not first play of the year, but his first play of the year against the Bears, where Jordan Love, like, the ball bounces off the ground and then they hit Musgrave way on the left sideline and he falls over because he's too open, and then they hit it against the Cowboys on the right side and he stands up, and after the game, like, what was it? LaFleur
was like applauding him. Yeah,
it was like Musgrave didn't fall out; we kept his feet, and then they were like, "Yeah!" And it's like the whole team knows. It's like he's kind of runs like Bambi out there, but he's a good player.
Yeah, so I think they have speed, size. Tight ends can attack different parts of the field, and they have different skill sets, and they can have them both out there at once.
Yeah, no, and I'm excited to see them both out there once. I don't know how they're going to get all these guys. And when we talk about the receivers,
we've got exciting receivers.
Like, can we play with one fewer lineman, or I don't even know. Like, can we add another guy on the field?
Love might have something to say about that.
Let's petition for 12 players on each side of the football. I think that'd be fun. But Dad, you want to wrap it up really quick with Sims and I'm guessing DeGuara with just what you got for them, and then we'll move on to receivers.
Yeah. So Sims, he was third most in snaps, 212. He only was targeted 6 times. It caught 5 of 6 for 25 yards. He only ran a route on 69% of his pass play, so significantly lower route participation from him than Musgrave or Kraft. He was mostly an inline tight end, 92%, so way above Kraft at like in the 60s and Musgrave in the 50s. And he was the second best pass blocker of the group at 68.7 PFF grade, 23rd in the league. So there's not too much. I think they're trying to groom him to try to be their blocking tight end going forward. We'll see how well. He's not like a huge guy like Mercedes was. So I don't know if they're going to want to add somebody or not. And then finally, well, I guess to DeGuara, who had the same number of snaps, 212, 15 pass blocking. He had 117 run blocking. Caught all 8 of his targets for 65 yards. And ran around on 80% of his passing snaps, so significantly more than Sims. He had a very poor pass blocking grade, though, by PFF, 29. That's last in the league.
Oh, dead last in the league.
Amongst all tight ends with at least 15 reps, he was last.
Yeah.
In pass blocking grade. So I don't have much more to say about him. It seems like his usage was going down as the season went on.
Yeah, and we'll talk about him at the end. He's a free agent. I don't really see them bringing him back. I think... he hasn't been as, I think, what they wanted him to be when they brought him in. I think it's fair to say, right?
Yeah. And then to Tyler Davis, who tore his ACL the preseason opener and missed the year.
Yeah. But yeah, I think still really excited for the tight end. Even Sims, I think, flashed some stuff. I saw him plant a guy in the ground, like with a stiff arm earlier in the year. That was sick. And he seems like a decent player. And I think he's a very solid third tight end. But Dad, are you ready to move on to receivers?
Yeah, let's go into those receivers because we've got a lot of exciting players there too, I think.
I know. I mean, we've got a lot of exciting players all over the offense. But let's start with Christian Watson. He played in 11 games for Green Bay this year, 9 regular season games and 2 playoff games. He dealt with hamstring injuries pretty much the whole season. Caused him to miss both the first 3 games of the year as well as the final 5 games of the regular season. And he actually said he's reaching out to various specialists to talk about, how to avoid those going forward because they hampered him last year as well. Also made him severely limited in playoff games. So keep in mind when I'm talking about these stats that are playoff and regular season, in the playoffs, he only played about 49% of snaps in the playoffs, whereas in the regular season, he was at around 80% of snaps. So he was really, I think, just trying to tough it out in those playoff games.
Or be a decoy.
Because he only had 3 targets, like 2 catches, I think. But overall on the season, he had 30 catches for 56 30 catches on 56 targets for 442 yards and 5 touchdowns. The comparisons I'm making are amongst 96 receivers with at least 40 targets. That's 20% of the max targets on the year. A 53.6% completion rate when targeted was 90th of 96. That, can kind of just think back to all those deep shots we missed earlier in the season when he was playing. I'm sure you all remember those. 40.2 yards per game was 55th amongst those 96 receivers. 7.9 yards per target was 57th. 1.48 yards per route run was 56th. 4.1 yards after catch per reception was 48th. A 6.3% drop rate was 51st. 0.006 EPA per target was second lowest on the team, on the Packers, that is, this year. And then a 48.2% success rate. So overall, you look at all those stats, they kind of composite out to around, 50th of 90. So kind of 50th of 96. So kind of, an average receiver on the year. But I do think that the eye test for me was a bit different. When I watched him against, say, the Chiefs, or I watched him against the Lions in the second game, it did seem they were trying to get him to be the go-to guy when he was healthy. Wouldn't you say, Dad?
Yeah, I mean, those healthy games, he looked really, really good. And then his hamstring got pulled, while he was running after the catch.
Yeah, and it looked like it was while he was just trying to go down to slide. I mean, you look at those games where he was healthy, and I hate to, belabor the point and, make arbitrary cutoffs, but, he had the game against Detroit, 7 targets, 5 catches, 94 yards. Game against Kansas City, 9 catches, 7 targets, 71 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And he had a touchdown against Detroit as well. Both those games are high, like 80 grades for PFF. So they thought he played an awesome game. And then he gets injured at the end of that Chiefs game, and he really never gets healthy again after that. So he was just kind of really hitting his stride on the season. He was being their go-to receiver at that point. He was getting most of the snaps, and then it just kind of got cut off right there as he was, I think, really hitting a stride there. So it was tough, but I do think, I'm interested to see what happens this next year. They're getting a new strength and conditioning coordinator. We have not heard, strength and conditioning coach. We've not heard who that's going to be yet, but you do wonder about like all the hamstring injuries they had this year and whether or not they thought that was handled correctly. And, maybe that could help Watson stay healthy next year. You never know. But yeah, so that's for him. Anything you wanted to add there? Should we move on to Romeo Doubs?
Well, I sure hope he can get healthy and play up to his potential, because when he's playing well and healthy,
the offense is much better.
The whole offense looks so good.
Yeah, so much better.
Both this year and his rookie year.
Yeah, 100% agreed. And I mean, it just sucks because I see people online like blaming him and like, y'all are clowns. Like, leave that man alone. He wants to be healthy. Like, what are we doing here?
There's always somebody out there who wants to do some kind of character assassination because somebody is hurt and can't play.
Yeah.
It has to be some kind of personality flaw because somebody's injured.
Yeah. And they're just as frustrated as like everyone else is.
Take it at face value. Yeah, he's hurt. He's hurt. That's why he can't do
That's why he can't play.
What he wants to do.
He wants to play, he just can't. Romeo Doubs, though, he played in all 19 games for the Packers this season. Over those games, he had 69 receptions on 105 targets for 908 yards and 9 touchdowns. I'm again comparing him to those 96 receivers with at least 40 targets. He had the 7th most receiving touchdowns in the league this year, which is kind of a fun number with those 9. 65.7% completion rate when targeted was 44th. 47.8 yards per game was 45th. 8.65 yards per target was 41st. 1.64 yards per route run was 45th. 3.1 yards after catch per reception was 79th. 6.8% drop rate was 56th, and then he had 0.446 EPA per target. That's a really high number, and mostly because of all those touchdowns. And then a 55.6% success rate. Dad, this was a guy where, you composite all those numbers out. He's around 40th, 43rd, again, kind of like an average to a slightly above average receiver. And that's kind of how we were feeling about him. We were like, hey, maybe he's the 4th receiver on this team. And, he's a really good 4th receiver. That feels great. And then Romeo Doubs came into the playoffs like a man on a mission. I mean, he was PFF's highest graded wide receiver in the playoffs. He dominated in the Cowboys game. He was easily their best receiver against San Francisco as well. I mean, he showed a gear that I did not know he had in terms of running with the ball against Dallas.
Side?
Against the right side. He's pulling away from people easily. And I'm like, okay, all right. And it made me kind of rethink the depth chart in my head. I was like, okay. So we have 2 tight ends we feel like we have to play. We got Watson where the offense is much better when he plays. We got Jaden Reed, who we'll talk about in a little bit, who's, was great as a rookie. He was one of the best Packers rookie receivers ever. You got Dontavian Wicks, who we'll talk about later. And then we got Romeo Doubs, who was the best receiver in the playoffs. How are we going to get these guys on the field? I have no idea, but it's a good problem to have, Dad. What did you feel about Romeo Doubs this year?
Yeah, so as the year went on, I was having him fall down my depth chart behind Reed, behind Wicks, as Wicks started playing more. It's like, this guy is leading the league.
Got to be on the field,
as a rookie in yards of separation per route run. But then, playoffs come around and Doubs is the best receiver on the field.
Yeah. For either team, really.
For either team.
Like, they couldn't guard him. He was just, I mean, Stephon Gilmore, I mean, he gave him fits. He gave Stephon Gilmore for the Cowboys fits that entire game. And, like, he looked pretty good against the Niners, too, when, like, at times the offense was stalling and they were having trouble, getting completions. So I don't really know what to make of it, because in the regular season, I would say, hey, like, he's dropping some passes, to be at the, low, like, kind of lower, like, half of the league and dropping passes, to be like, because I'm just thinking about, the crosser against the Lions where he drops that slant on a big third down, has some other big drops. But, he also had some really big plays and, was kind of Jordan Love's go-to guy in the red zone. I mean, at the goal line, anytime he needed to throw a fade to a receiver, it was almost always Dobbs. And Dobbs, to his credit, came down with it more often than he didn't when those like balls were being thrown to him in the red zone, in the end zone.
Yeah, and one thing you could see this year compared to his rookie year. So his rookie year, he only caught 1 of every 3 contested catches, 5 out of 15 opportunities. And this year, he was over 50%.
Hey, that's a nice pull. I like that. I didn't actually have that one in my notes. That's a good pull there. But hey, that's development, and development is, a thing. And he seems like a guy who, I mean, he stepped up on the biggest stage, so he's not afraid of the moment. But yeah, he definitely, I think, made a statement there. It's like, hey, like, I know the rest of these receivers are pretty good. I'm also very good.
Don't forget about me.
Don't forget about me. And, fair enough. We won't, like I said, PFF had him as their highest graded receiver, not just on the Packers, of any receiver in the playoffs, which is pretty awesome. Anything else you wanted to say on Dobbs, or should we move on down the list? We've got a lot of receivers to talk about.
We can move down the list. I think just shout out his, I think yards per catch in the playoffs is also stellar.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But Jaden Reed is the next receiver that we have to talk about. He played in 18 games for the Packers this season. Over those games, he had 68 catches on 97 targets. And keep in mind, he was playing through a variety of like chest injury, ankle injury, and he only really missed 1 game. So shout out to him. But 68 receptions on 97 targets for 828 yards and 8 touchdowns. Once again, comparing to those same 96 receivers. A 70.1% completion percentage when targeted was 22nd amongst those 96. So, upper quartile. That's great. 46 yards per game was 47th. 8.54 yards per target was 45th, so right around average. 1.95 yards per route run was 26th. So again, upper quartile of all those 96 receivers. 5.4 yards after catch per reception was 24th. That's great. 4.2% drop rate was 31st. That's good. That's solid. That's better than average. 0.314 EPA per target, and then 48% success rate. And then tack on 128 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. Some other fun stats is he set the Packers rookie receptions record, and he got 1 third-place vote for Offensive Rookie of the Year.
Oh, I missed that.
Yeah, I know. I did as well. So he came in 6th. He was awesome. Excellent with the ball in his hands. He won me a fantasy championship, so I'll always be thankful to him for that. But yeah, he did not have as impactful of a playoffs maybe as we might have hoped, but he had an awesome regular season. And I think for so long we were looking for a guy who would be dynamic with the ball in his hands. And I think we have that with Jaden Reed.
Yeah, I think we got a guy who can really live in the middle of the field, slants, quick hitters, and then run the ball with speed.
It's like the last time we had a guy this dynamic was like prime Randall Cobb, like 8 years ago. Like 9 years ago, something like that was the last time we had a guy that felt this twitched up, both like with the ball in his hands and then with the speed across the middle of the field, running these big crossers. Like, I mean, it felt like almost every game there was like, it was just him running free over the middle, like across the field with the guy trailing behind him trying to keep up. Like, it is faster than he timed. I'm going to give a credit to the Packers scouts timers, because they were like, oh, we clocked him at a 4.3. And usually when the Packers say that, I'm like, yeah, right, buddy. You're lying. But this time I actually might believe it.
It's like, yeah, just because you're slow hitting the start switch, and so it seemed he was done soon, doesn't mean he's really almost, 0.08 faster than the official time?
1/10 of a second faster. It's like, I'm skeptical, but hey, for this one, I believe it. I mean, Dad, I think, when they picked Jaden Reed in the second round, he had a kind of a quiet mini camp and training camp where we're like, kind of like, that's like, I was like, I hope he can put it together. And then he put it together in this season for sure.
Yeah. And he was a guy who was not on my radar leading up to last year's draft.
We thought he was going to be too small.
I didn't think he was going to fit their profile. And so I kind of didn't pay enough attention to him. And it's like, whoa, they picked him in the second round. Which is also higher than I was expecting for him to go.
No,
and it was worth it.
It was 100% worth it. I mean, are there that many receivers that are better than him out of that class? I mean, I'd argue he was better than most of the receivers in that class. Like, if you redrafted the class today, he'd probably go first round. And I'm not going to take that back at all. I don't think that's even that hot of a take. But yeah, anything else you got on Reed? I mean, the main thing I have to say is, you love to see those high yards per route run numbers and yards after catch per reception. That's like exactly the role that you want. The fact that they have a guy to give these designed like end arounds to, who can actually make a move with the ball in his hands. I don't need to see, no offense, I don't need to see Alan Lazard or Geronimo Allison trying to take an end around at a 4.6 yard 40 dash and just inability to turn the corner at all. Like, just driving me crazy. And even watching Christian Watson do it. I mean, Christian Watson, when he was able to get up to speed, was great at it. But the problem is he's not really making a guy miss at not full speed. So the fact they have a guy for those design touches, I feel like we haven't had a guy for those design touches since like Tyler Irvin. Like,
right. We haven't had anybody for the Tyler Irvin role since Tyler Irvin.
I know, right?
Until now.
Yeah, and Reed is great at it.
Yeah, and see, I feel like he has the speed to get around the corner in the end, but also the ability to cut inside and like go inside the tight end block or the tackle block as well, and hit those rush lanes.
And despite being small, he's not easy to tackle. Like, he'll drive his legs and he'll get a few extra yards. Sorry, go ahead.
I'll just say he's tough too, as you mentioned. Is like playing with injuries.
Oh yeah, 100%.
As well.
But Dontavian Wicks is the next receiver for the Packers. He played in 17 games for the Packers this season. Over those games, he had 41 catches on 61 targets for 605 yards and 5 touchdowns. Once again, looking at 96 receivers to compare him against. 67.2% completion percentage when targeted was 37th. 35.6 yards per game was 65th amongst them. 9.9 yards per target was 16th. 1.94 yards per route run was 27th. 5.3 yards after catch per reception was 25th, and a 4.7% drop rate was 35th. 0.501 EPA per target was the highest on the entire team, and then a 59.7% success rate is really good. The one that really stands out there is that 9.9 yards per target. That's pretty fun. Big fan of that. Big fan of almost getting a first down every single time you throw it to a guy.
Every single time you get yeah.
That's a big thumbs up for me. Some other fun stats: he had the highest receiving DVOA by a rookie receiver since 2020. That's per @DevyYusuf on Twitter. So that's higher than Jefferson or Chase as rookies. And then per Arjun Menon on Twitter, he had the highest rate of getting open versus man coverage of all receivers in the NFL this season. Not just rookies, of all receivers, he had the highest open separation rate against man coverage. So yeah, there's a guy that I was like, is this the best receiver on the team? Like, when I was watching him, I was like, this guy they can't guard him at all.
But yeah, always get open.
Isn't it crazy?
A useful skill.
So isn't it crazy he went in the 5th round? Is it crazy that he went in the 5th round, or that the Packers took Sean Clifford before they took him? That's kind of wild. I no hate to Sean Clifford, but damn.
See, I think what we're finding out is the real Dontavian Wicks was the guy from college 2 years ago, not last year's Dontavian Wicks.
And we talked about that as we talked about when we talked about the draft recaps. This is a bet that the guy that is actually Dontavian Wicks in the NFL was the guy from 2 years ago, and this past year was an aberration. And it looks like they were 100% right.
And that guy from 2 years ago would have been an end of first round receiver.
I think he would have probably been end of second. He would have been
end of second. I was thinking
he would have been a day 2 pick. I think coming out of Virginia.
I think I'm going to go early second.
I mean, now I'm looking at redrafts of the 2023 draft. I'm looking at him go 16th, 17th, 18th, and he's really good. He's really, really good. I don't have really much else to say. His route running ability.
It's crazy to say, and people might go bonkers.
You're going to say Devontae Adams. Don't say Devontae.
Yes, I'm going to say Devontae.
Don't. Okay, don't put that on him. That's a lot of pressure. But that's the thing.
It's not pressure because he's not going to hear what I say.
That's fair. That's fair. Hey, you never know. He might. Don't be like what's it? Ayo Edebiri. You know who that is? The woman from the Bear. she was on a podcast saying that she didn't think J-Lo was like a very good singer, and then she ended up having to host SNL with J-Lo as the musical guest. And so she was like, "So just so you know," and she like addressed it like on her monologue, like, "Just so you know, things you say on podcasts are never gone." But anyway, yeah, no, I mean the route running, his ability with the ball in his hands is very impressive. I feel like he's always open somehow. But yeah,
his ability to set up the defensive back and then change direction when they're not ready for it I think is already really good.
I forgot to mention this for Reed, but they kick ass as blockers too. Like they will like punch you in the mouth in the run game, and which is what you love to see. Like that, and that's what I know. Matt LaFleur is like, yes, he's pounding the table. He's like, get that guy on the field. Anything else you wanted to say on Wicks? I mean, I thought those stats were fun. I think the yards per yards per target is a really awesome stat to be already like around top 15 in the league there as a rookie is pretty sick. Those numbers are per PFF again. But yeah, anything else you wanted to add on Wicks? Is he the number one receiver next year?
That's a very interesting thing to think about because of his ability to just get open every time.
Yeah, it's probably the most important skill a receiver can have, right? Like, right? I don't know. But yeah, nothing else on Wicks. Then I'm just going to go on to Bo Melton, who played in 7 games for the Packers this season. I'm going to start having a little less for each of these guys as we get down the depth chart. Overall, 18 catches on 26 targets for 244 yards and 2 touchdowns. Since he had less than the threshold we were previously looking at, I'm now comparing him to the 122 receivers that had at least 26 targets like him. 69.2% completion percentage when targeted was 33rd. 34.9 yards per game was 68th. 9.38 yards per target was 34th. 2.68 yards per route run was 6th in the league. That's not bad. 2.1 yards after catch per reception was like 117th, so he didn't do much with the ball in his hands. Not as much as I expected. 5.3% drop rate was 56, so around average. 0.397 EPA per target and a 59.3% success rate are very solid. If you look at only regular season, he was 6th in the whole league in yards per route run, which is, really fun, like I just mentioned. And then after he started getting snaps in week 15, this is a stat that you threw to me, through the playoffs. So week 15 through the playoffs, he was 8th in the league in passer rating when targeted and 10th in yards per route run. So he's a guy who kind of came out of nowhere, huh? I remember all the tweets. Who the hell is Bo Melton? And this was a guy that you were high on last season when they signed him off the Seahawks practice squad, was it?
Off the Seahawks practice squad, because he was one of he's very fast. He meets their thresholds. And from that draft, I think it was like, you might need to go to like Jacob Westendorf and Ross Uglum and Jacob Warren. I forget which one of those guys, but maybe the Packer draft guide. He was one of the Packers were like 3 of the 4 or 5 wide receivers that meet all their thresholds, with Bo Melton, Dobbs, and Watson from that draft.
Yeah. And I mean, the thresholds seem to be working. Whatever those thresholds are, they're looking pretty good.
Once he got his opportunity, he's doing something with it. And he's doing a little bit more in terms of, I feel like, wide receiver skill than I necessarily expected.
I thought he had,
that he's just going to be kind of an athletic guy, but he's showing a lot more ability to know the position. And
I mean, I joked that versus Minnesota, he just had like the invisibility cloak on because they just kept losing him. But he, I think, showed a lot more than that. I mean, he had the touchdown catch against San Francisco in the playoffs. He had a very good games, after that Minnesota game as well. It was not like a one-hit wonder. He had good games against Chicago in week 18. He's just a good player. He's a good receiver. But Dad, I don't want to spend too much time on these guys because we do still have the offensive line, and we're already at a pretty decent time. But I'm going to go on to Malik Heath really quick, unless there's anything else you want to add on Bo Melton.
No, let's move on.
Malik Heath played in 13 games for the Packers this season, 15 catches on 24 targets for 125 yards and a touchdown. Looking at 128 targets with at least 128 receivers with at least 24 targets. 62.5% completion percentage when targeted was like 78th. 9.6 yards per game was like 124th. Most of these are down in the hundreds. 5.2 yards per target, 1.07 yards per route run is 93rd. That's not great. Oh, the yards per target was 119th. 2.4 yards after catch per reception, 116th. 11.8% drop rate was a lot higher than I realized. That's 112th. I didn't realize he had that many drops on the year.
Ooh,
but still 0.198 EPA per target and 45.8% success rate. And a really good blocker, really physical. I know they liked his attitude out there. And I feel like he's a very, very, very respectable 5th, 6th receiver. Like, he was very solid this year. And then the last receiver I had was Samori Toure. He did not have a very good year, is all I'm going to say. He played in 11 games, 8 catches on 18 targets for 78 yards. Also an 11.1% drop rate, a negative 0.133 EPA per target, was the only one in the negatives on the team. Most of his metrics, I'm not even going to read them off, were around like 140th or lower amongst 150 receivers. So not great for Toure. Dad, any last notes on Heath or Toure, or do you want to move on to the offensive line?
I would just say that I think I really like, as you mentioned, Heath's blocking ability to take over that part of Alan Lazard's role. And I feel like Toure, he just kept falling further and further down the depth chart as the year went on and kept getting passed by more and more guys.
Definitely. But Dad, offensive line, let's move on to that. And that will kind of be it for the 2023 season in terms of reviewing the offense.
All right, so let's look at the offensive line. As a whole, they were, in terms of cash spending for the year, 27th in the league, but 12th in salary cap allocation because of not dead cap, but kind of carryover for previous years for Bakhtiari. Overall, as a group, by ESPN's pass block win rate, they were second in the league, only to Kansas City. And in run block win rate, they were 16th, so kind of right in the middle of the pack. And with no players in the top 10 in run block win rate by ESPN. PFF graded them as their 10th best team in pass blocking and 24th in run blocking. And that's something I think they actually, in the beginning of the year, like the first half, they were lower. They were near the bottom in run block in run blocking. They kind of crept up the rankings a little bit anyway, from 30 up to 24 as the season went on. Looking at DVOA, so adjusted for strength of schedule from FTN Fantasy, they had the 5th best adjusted sack rate against and the 8th best adjusted line yards in the run game. So that surprised me.
That's higher than I think. That's a lot higher than I would think.
A lot higher than I think. That's something that you typically, that's assigned to the offensive line rather than the running backs. Now, they were, however, according to FTN Fantasy, the weakest part of their run blocking was power success, where they were 23rd in the league. Power success is when you have 2 yards or less to go on 3rd down, 4th down, or any goal-to-go situations.
That tracks.
So if it seems like they can never quite get that first down on short yardage situation or punch in the end zone,
it's because they haven't. But yeah, I was going to say, if you feel that way, it's because they haven't. And it's kind of something that they've always been bad at. And it's the reason they drafted Dylan. And I think it's really the reason that they need to invest more in offensive line, because they're really awesome at finding these pass blocking offensive linemen late in the draft. And that's like that's kind of the Packers' superpower. The past decade is finding these offensive linemen for nothing that are great. They did it with Zach Tom. They did it with et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Well,
but a lot of these guys,
4th rounder, Bakhtiari 4th rounder, Runyon a long time starter 6th rounder. Walker's looking like a
solid player 7th rounder.
7th rounder.
All these guys are more finesse players, and they don't get any drive. So I feel like they might need to invest a little more in offensive line so they can actually run the ball consistently when they need to. But anyway, Dad, sorry to interject there. Are we getting to the players?
So that was the big picture, and now let's get to the players. So I'll start with the guy who played the most snaps at left tackle, Rasheed Walker. He finished by 2nd in the league amongst all tackles by ESPN's pass block win rate, behind only Trent Williams.
That's crazy to me.
Isn't that crazy?
I find it hard
to believe
about that. Because the way I feel about Walker is if he was our swing tackle, I'd be like, yes, that's awesome. He is a great swing tackle. But when I'm thinking about him at left tackle, I'm like, he's solid. He's pretty good. And I don't know if that's where you want to be at left tackle. But anyway, continue.
Yeah. So this is a case where different sources of offensive line play measurements are not in agreement. So per PFF, he gave up 3.9% pressure rate, which was 7th just within the Packers offensive line group and 46th in the league amongst offensive tackles. Though his overall pass blocking grade was better than that. So 74.7, which was third in the team, just behind Bakhtiari and Jenkins. Now, for run blocking, he was slightly below average, with a grade of 57th in the league. And he had similar grades in run blocking, whether it was a zone scheme or a gap scheme.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing with him is, he seems like a pretty solid pass protector, but the run blocking, I felt like, I was on team like, let's try Nyman there. And that was obviously not a good decision or a good idea. That's why I don't get paid money for this. But that's just kind of how I felt about it. And, the stats kind of match up that he's like a pretty good pass protector, but the run game desires. Here's the thing. He's a 7th round pick in his second year. He played way better than he had any right to play. Like let's have reasonable expectations for him. But I do still think it's a spot where they could upgrade is all I'm going to say.
It seems like it, though. Yeah. Not if you believe ESPN.
I know, right? They apparently really love Rasheed Walker. And then moving down the line, I guess we think that we have the best, like ESPN probably has like the best left side of the line in the entire league, I'm guessing.
Yeah. So Elton at left guard. So Walker played just under 1,000 snaps. Elton played just over 1,000 snaps. He finished 15th amongst all interior offensive linemen in ESPN's pass block win rate, which put him at 8th among all guards, which puts him in like the top 8th of all starting guards. I think they're like 64 starting guards in the league. They put him in like the top 12%. He was second on the team and amongst the Packers offensive linemen in PFF pass blocking grade, 6th in the league amongst guards, and only gave up 2.4% pressure rate, which was 19th amongst guards in the whole NFL. He was, however, only 53rd in the league amongst guards in run blocking by PFF, with similar grades, slightly below average in zone and gap schemes.
Yeah.
So you have a theme here where it's a big difference between the run blocking and the pass blocking on the individual players, just as it was for the unit as a whole.
Yeah, and he's someone where I think they need more out of him because they're paying him a good amount of money now as a starting guard. He's one of the highest paid guards in the league. And he also, unfortunately, picked about the worst time to have his worst game of the year against the Niners. I mean, he gave up 4 pressures in that game. He got beat by Hargrave relentlessly. It was a tough game for him in that one.
He had a rough game in that one.
Yeah, he gave up 4 pressures, like I said. And they need him to run block better because he's supposed to pretty much be their best run blocker by a lot. And I get that it's harder when you don't have very good run blockers next to you. But I think they're going to need a little more from him next year, I think. Wouldn't you say? Yeah,
they need him to be elite.
They need him to be
because
like
he's getting paid. I think he's like the 4th highest paid guard in the league. And so I think they need him to perform like the 4th best. The top 5 guard in the league.
So I would say, looking at it like in terms of expectations, I would say Walker exceeded expectations, even though I think Jenkins played better than him. I would say Jenkins was a little worse than expectations. And I know it's hard when, you have a different left tackle next to you than you practice all offseason with. And, center's not great that we'll talk about in a second, but I think they do need him to play to the level, like a higher level than the other players because there's more expectations on him. He's been in the league longer. But speaking of center, Josh Myers. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so he had the most snaps of anybody on the offensive line, like over 1,200. He was 14th amongst the ESPN pass block win rate interior offensive lineman, which put him 8th amongst centers, which puts him about in the top 25, top quarter of the league.
Yeah.
It's another one where they don't quite match up, where PFF has him as a below average pass blocker, slightly below average grade. But he only gave up a 2.4% pressure rate, which is 19th amongst
this one tracks for me though, because I think the problem with Myers is he'll win 80% of the time, but the losses are so bad, like instantaneous 0.5 second pressure. Like you have been walked, like you were a ghost. You did not touch the defensive lineman. I think like when he gives up a pressure, he's just getting smoked. It's like instantaneous. And it happens in the run game too is the problem. He just misses the guy. And I think that's the reason that like his rate, like stats look pretty good, but when he's losing, it's really bad.
Yeah, really disruptive to the offense. And his run blocking is a little bit below average as well. This one, one of the kind of the same. And this is kind of though I guess he had one good pass blocking year. But mostly this is who he's been, where slightly below average center in the league.
Which is, it's another spot where I think this is the spot that's like is the second most in need of improvement on the line. I think left tackle's third most need of improvement, and we'll get to the next one in a second. But for Myers, I mean, it's just, they picked him in the second round. They picked him. I know people don't like to hear this, but they picked him a pick before, an all-pro level center for who everyone had as the number one center on the board. And so there's going to be higher expectations and more criticism with that coming. And he's been, an average to slightly below average center for 3 years in the league. And I think it's just a spot they need to look at with him going into the last year of his deal.
That's right. That's the other thing to consider. He's only going to have one more year left on his rookie contract.
But in terms of like his performance this year, I thought he got like slightly better as the year went, at least. Like that, he had that going for him at least. But
after a little bit of a rough patch, he ended well in the last 3 games of the year, especially pass blocking.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, and knock on wood, obviously, but we talked about all, training camp and mini camp. I don't know if you remember these during the practices, like, and another botch snap, and another botch snap, and another botch snap. But they did not actually have that many issues with the entire,
thankfully. But yeah, it was like a couple of those every day in training camp,
which was, like wild. But so at least there wasn't that. So I would say, I would give him like below average for what they invested in him, but about what I expected in terms of like what we've seen through 2 years. But right guard is where I think this is going to be the place that they need to find a new starter at.
Yeah. So John Runyon led the team in snaps at right guard with just over 1,000. He finished 15th amongst interior offensive linemen in pass block win rate. So it's interesting. They had like amongst the interior offensive line, ESPN's pass block win rate, they had the 14th, 15th, and 16th best rated players in the league on their team. Well, it's if you include it's more like 90 players for starters.
That's true. That's fair. So
because you got the two guards and the center.
ESPN really loves us. What can we say?
So that puts him in. He basically, by their metric, was about the same as Elton, being like a top 8th, like top 12% of the starting guards. He only gave up a 2.1% pressure rate, which was best of the team, second best on the team behind Bakhtiari, and 10th in the league amongst guards. But all of that only got him the 5th best pass blocking grade on the team. And his pass blocking grade overall was 33rd in the league, according to PFF, amongst guards. So even though his pressure rate was 10th best, his overall pass blocking grade was 33rd. And then when it came to run blocking, he was 63rd in the league amongst guards.
According
to PFF.
That feels about right.
And, and particularly, so below average in all measures, especially in gap schemes where he was a grade of only 45, which is well below the Mendoza line.
Yeah. And Runyon's a guy where it's like, it was weird because he was so much better the previous 3 years. And then this year he was so bad that they were rotating snaps at right guard through the playoffs. They were rotating guys at right guard. And it was kind of shocking, to be honest, because I mean, I think he closed the season pretty well, if I remember correctly, but the run blocking has always been not great from him, but even the pass blocking was just kind of And, he's a guy who I think someone is going to bring in. He's a free agent this year. Someone's going to bring in, and he's going to be a very serviceable guard for them. But for some reason this year, he's had a down year.
Yeah, this was the worst pass blocking grade since his rookie year. He'd had second and third years were much better. But so that was a bit of a downturn for him this year. And so we'll see. And his contract is up now.
Exactly.
As well.
But moving on to Zach Thomas at right tackle.
Right. So he finished 16th amongst tackles in pass block win rate. And PFF had him as the 18th best tackle in the league in terms of pressure rate at only 2.9%. 6th best in the league in PFF's run blocking grades. This is like the first player on the offensive line we've seen a good run blocking grade for. And a significantly better zone blocking grade than gap scheme at 80.
Kind of makes sense. He's, he put on some weight this year. He looked noticeably stronger, but he is more of like a movement guy.
Yeah, he's a good agility, fast mover, kind of dancing bear kind of player.
Yeah, but he's not even quite a dancing bear. He's not quite big enough to be a dancing bear, in my opinion. He's like a. He definitely looked stronger this year, I will say.
Remember when he came into training camp, we were like, "Oh, he looks bigger,
smaller than Mercedes Lewis." I remember, but no. Oh, I thought he'd been his first training camp. Yes.
Oh no, I mean his second training camp. You could tell
this
he looked
year
bigger.
Was like, yeah, no, he looks sturdier, much sturdier this year. Yeah, a lot sturdier. No, but I think
we're set at
he was their
right
best
tackle.
Lineman. Oh yeah, I mean,
unless they move him to left tackle.
I was going to say, here's my question: unless they move him to left tackle. But no, I think he was easily their best lineman this year by leaps and bounds, in my opinion. I know some of the numbers favor Elton, but I thought Tom was much better this year. I thought Tom was awesome all year, just kicked ass. I mean, pretty much the only time
you could tell how much a difference it made when he had to go out with that concussion.
Yeah, they couldn't run the ball anymore at all. As soon as Tom went out, they couldn't do anything. They couldn't block Bosa, they couldn't run the ball. And yeah, no, it sucked that he had to go out in that game because I think they.
I saw the play too. He fell in the back of his head and immediately started holding his face.
Yeah, guess that sucks. But no, yeah, Tom was awesome this year. Who you got next? You got Sean Ryan next.
So Sean Ryan, so the other half of that split at right guard, he got a lot fewer snaps, only about a quarter of the snaps that Runyon had. His pass blocking grade was only 42 by PFF, last on the team, and 86th out of 99 guards in the league.
Not great, Bob.
And his pressure rate is 3.3%, which is 57th out of the 99. Guards had a similar snap count. And his run grade of 50 was, it was better in gap runs than zone runs, but with, not as many snaps.
Yeah.
So, and his run blocking grade overall was 73rd out of 102.
That's worse than I thought it was going to be. I thought he was going to be average before we started doing this research. I was like, no, Sean Ryan, like when they put him in there, like he was solid. He was like a little better than Runyon. No, I don't. That's not what the numbers are telling us. The numbers
too many misses. You can see like there are times where he's still making misses in the play.
He's got slow feet. Yeah, that's the problem.
If he gets his hands on somebody, he does okay.
He's strong, but he's got slow feet. And the problem is like he's probably the right guard next year unless they bring someone in. I think they want him to be the right guard because otherwise why give him the snaps? But I don't know about that one.
Yes.
But yeah, so there's a reason they were trying to play Royce Newman over him. But he's not very good either. So
nope.
But yeah, they need more depth on the offensive line going forward for sure. But Josh Nijman, you got next. I don't know if there's anything else you want to say on Sean Ryan. I mean,
no, that was all for Ryan.
He did more this year than he did. He was better this year than his rookie year.
It was hard to do
any less.
It's almost impossible
it was hard
to
to contribute. It was actually impossible to contribute any less than he did his rookie year. And he did, to his credit, he looked better this year. Like he was playable at least. He wasn't like completely unplayable. But he is still not he's not close to being a plus starter yet, which I think they were maybe hoping he could be when they took him in the third round. But Josh Nijman, you had next, it looks like.
Yeah, so he played about a quarter of the snaps at left tackle. His pass blocking grade was 67th out of 93 tackles with a similar number of snaps, with 150 pass blocking snaps, which is what he had, 157. And his pressure rate of 5%, just tied for last on the team, and 68th out of 93 tackles in the league.
I don't know what happened to this guy. Because remember when Stenovich
so much worse
called him
this year than the year before?
Remember when Stenovich called him out too? Early in the year, he said pretty much to the media is like, yeah, no, he's not doing enough. Like he doesn't seem like he wants it. Pretty much was like kind of the gist of it. I was like, damn,
it was really
that's
harsh criticism.
It was so harsh that Matt LaFleur came the next day and apologized. He was like, yeah, no, we're trying to build everyone up, but we're trying to drive them to be better, and we really love Yash. And I was like, damage control, not great.
Nope. That was one of the harshest criticisms I've ever
that
heard.
you will ever hear from a coach publicly for a player. And Stanovich doesn't even talk that much. Like he speaks in like 8-word sentences.
Yeah. So then his run blocking grade was kind of meh, but I guess a little less than meh. 89th out of 104 offensive tackles in his run blocking grade. And then we get to Royce.
Every time, and I know it's difficult to be in a tackle rotation. Like that can't be easy to just be like cold coming off the bench. Like, oh, you're going to play tackle this series. You're like, okay, I'm ready, I guess. But you have no idea of what the pass rushers have been doing. You have no idea. Like it's probably not easy.
Get into a rhythm.
Whatever that situation was for him did not work for him. It was not good for him. And even when he was the starter, it was not good for him. So.
Yeah, he basically lost the competition to Rasheed Walker.
And fairly, Walker was pretty good this year. Like, it wasn't great, but he is like the third or fourth, like probably the third. The thing is, like, Tom and Elton have spots locked down. And if you told me I could only replace 2 spots out of the next 3, I'm replacing center and right guard, and I'm letting Walker, roll at left tackle. We'll see what happens. But yeah, Nyman, he's a free agent this year. Someone will probably pay him, and we'll see. But especially a little disappointing considering the fact that he was on like a $4 million tender. So he was like a decently paid tackle, like much higher paid than most of the rest of the guys on the line. So it is what it is, though.
He was the third highest paid player on the O-line behind Bakhtiari and Jenkins.
Exactly. And it's the second highest paid of the guys who were healthy. So, and he still couldn't crack the rotation. So that, it's a little disappointing. Who you got next on the list?
So Royce Newman, he played left guard. He didn't play any right guard. He only came into left guard. I guess when Elton was hurt or was just decided that time to send somebody else in at the end of the game. But his pass blocking rate was only 52.2, 69th out of 99 guards in the league.
And one thing I forgot to
pressure rate of 5%.
One thing I forgot to add on Elton is he did hurt his knee, against Atlanta early in the season. So that is like at least some context to his play maybe being a little below average. I forgot about that, and then I remembered it as you were saying Newman played some left guard. And I was like, that's right. Elton got his knee fallen into in that Atlanta game, and then he came back pretty quickly from it. But
he did come back, maybe a little bit. Context. And then I guess they really had that struggle against Detroit, the first Detroit game.
Yeah.
So maybe that bothered him more of the year than we knew.
Maybe. I just wanted to add that as context. But anyway, continue. Sorry.
Yeah, and Newman was bad at run blocking as well.
Newman's not great. That's a spot they can improve as backup guard.
Then I want to actually talk about Bakhtiari, who took up more salary cap than the rest of the offensive line combined.
Yeah.
Got 55 snaps, 30, all in week 1. However, he had an elite pass blocking grade by PFF. 89.8. Gave up 0 pressures on 30 pass blocking snaps.
The issue is not the performance.
He had the second best run blocking grade behind Zach Tom of all the O linemen on the team.
It helps.
And among all tackles in the league, he had the best pass blocking grade and the best pass blocking grade in true pass sets by PFF.
I know.
All tackles.
I know. The issue is not performance. He's still great when he plays. He's awesome when he plays. And I will say, he's playing the Bears, who had no pass rushers, like at all
true.
In that game.
He was having
best
fun
pass rusher was Yannick Ngakwe. Like,
he was having fun with the Bears fans during that game.
No, he was. And I love Bakhtiari, but like it's really tough because like you said. Go ahead.
So then after that game, his knee flared up, and he got another surgery, ending his season, when tests uncovered a cartilage issue in his knee that they hadn't noticed before. And what he said at the time was that they finally know what the problem is. Which
I want to know how the hell they didn't before. It's been years.
I think these things are maybe not everybody has the ability to see it.
I'm not talking about Bakhtiari. I'm like talking about the health, like his healthcare team. Like,
I know you're talking about
not find this.
That being able to read the MRI and see amongst all of everything else that's going on what the actual underlying problem is.
Yeah,
but sometimes there's a cascade of problems.
We've also heard like that. Like
we have heard this
the problem before. Like
yes,
this is like what
so we'll see.
Seventh. It's bad.
And then turn to the future. In December, he responded to a tweet that it's his plan to play for Green Bay next year. And then when Gutekunst after he said, "Oh, he still has a long way to go, and we don't know what's going on." I think
Yeah.
most people are not expecting him back, which we'll get to in a minute. And the other linemen on the team, Caleb Jones, Luke Tenuta, Kadeem Telfort, none of them got any snaps on offense.
Yeah, they were there. Tenuta was hurt the whole year. The other guys didn't play.
They held on to him to try to and they did the keep him on the active roster and then put him on IR so they could get him back at the end of the year, but then that never
materialized.
Right, never happened.
Mm-hmm. Well, that kind of wraps it up for the offensive line and wraps it up for our position review. Last thing we have to do is what's going next. So outgoing players, unrestricted free agents. Who are players that are unrestricted, might end up leaving this offseason? We talked about a few of them, right?
Yeah, so the unrestricted free agents are Yosh Nijman, John Runyon, A.J. Dillon, Josiah DeGuara, and Tyler Davis.
Yeah, and I think if I had to rank which ones I thought would be back in order, number 1 would be Tyler Davis. Number 2 would be Dillon. Number 3 would be Runyon. Number 4 would be DeGuara. And number 5 would be Nijman, I think, is how I would rank them.
Yeah, I suppose you could put DeGuara above Nijman just because Nijman might get significantly more money elsewhere. Somebody will pay him more. As a guy who has shown the ability to be a
solid tackle, which
a solid starter,
is rare in the NFL right now. There are not that many of those.
So there's a chance that he'll get more money than the Packers would want to pay somebody to be a backup. Well, but if DeGuara I had to, is not looking like he's going to get much of a contract after this year. He's gotten worse. But
if I had to bet, I think I think Dillon, maybe if he takes a team, if he doesn't end up making much money.
And according to SpotTrack, they have his market value at only $3.5 million per year.
Which, if it's and they don't feel
great about low, then I could see them bringing it back.
Maybe, but I think there's I was more confident in this before we did our research, and then I was looking, I was like, man, Dillon was worse than I thought he was, and it was by far the worst year of his career. And each year he's gotten worse in most metrics, which is not great. But I think the only one that I really see back is Davis, and even
I think because nobody else is going to sign him, and they like him on special teams. I mean, he's going to be back more for special teams rather than a tight end.
Exactly, and then the other guys, the writing's on the wall for Runyon also because we're already rotating him, and that's never a great sign. And then we already talked about Nijman and DeGuara. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if none of them are back. Restricted free agents, who we got?
The only one is Patrick Taylor. The Packers have kind of held him, kept him around for a few years now, and they actually let him go at one point and then brought him back with injuries. But I think they're going to be drafting one or more running backs. And so I'd be surprised if Taylor would be on the 53 this year. And I don't know if he wants to spend another year on the Packers practice squad.
Yeah. It seems like other teams are interested in him, but I don't think they're going to necessarily feel like they need him back, especially because of the fact they didn't really give him many opportunities. They didn't seem to have any interest in playing him really as a traditional running back at all. They're like, no, we're not giving that guy carries. Let's bring in Kenyon Drake and James Robinson, who are both, frankly, very washed. They did not have much juice left in their legs. And
they didn't keep either one around for very long either.
And they still didn't want to give Patrick Taylor touches. So that's crazy to me. Exclusive rights free agents, looks like it's Bo Melton, Caleb Jones, and Emmanuel Wilson. I think those guys are all 100% back next year.
There is no reason for a team not to sign all of their exclusive rights free agents because it's a minimum salary. It has no impact on the cap.
Salary cap, yep. And all three of those players are good. And all three of those players are pretty good.
Yeah, there's a good chance for all of them. And it kind of sucks for those players.
No, I was going to say exclusive rights free agency sucks. It
is a one-way street, all in favor of the teams, and the players have
get nothing.
There's nothing they can do about it. They can't. If you don't get drafted, and you go through this 3-4 year period of getting the minimum salary before you can even get a chance at a good contract after.
Yeah. But anyway, we don't need to waste much time with the exclusive rights free agents. Cut candidates, Dad. It looks like you got 2 here for us.
Well, the big one that everybody's talking about is Bakhtiari. Yeah. So he's in the last year of his contract. He's due to have a cap hit of $40 million. About half of that has already been paid. So that's counting on the cap no matter what you do. Bringing him back So you just forget that $40 million number because it's kind of meaningless.
You'd save
the
20
question is
if you
$20 million to have him or not. You save $20 million by letting him go.
I think
if however you cut him while he's injured, it is a what storm that they can't deal with. They may have to pay all the money anyway if it gets up. If it goes into some kind of
it's messy
arbitration about. So we'll just have to wait and see what's going to happen with all that. One thing that they maybe could do, and I have to look at a little more detail to get some savings for this year, is essentially just spread out that that next $20 million by
at void years.
They need to convert his salary to bonus because what he's owed next is salary, not bonus.
Yeah, but they can
convert some of that $20 million salary to bonus and then add void years. So it could maybe be like $10 million or $5 million, and then you have to pay the piper later.
Yeah, but like you would get a little lump of cash this next season. I think it all depends on how they view like 2024. Are they going for it in 2024 or are they going for 2025?
Right.
I guess we'll see.
When do they want to have that money?
Yeah, but I do think like if you could cut him for 20 million, like let's say the injury concern, like let's say he gets healthy and then you have the decision, like you can cut him for 20 million. What would you do? I know what I would do. I think the 20 million is more valuable at this point. I know it's a cold business, but like, and I love Bakhtiari as a Packer, and he's been an awesome player when he plays, but you can't bet $20 million that he's going to play more than
That's
half
the thing
games.
is you're basically putting a bet down.
Yeah.
$20 million of whether he'll play.
Yeah.
And it's hard to trade.
Yeah. No, very hard. And maybe you can sucker the Jets into it, but
that's what everybody says.
One else.
The only team that's going to trade for
the
Jets.
That's they might. They actually might.
You think is their offensive line
is really bad.
Is really bad. They need desperately to improve it, which is like why they weren't drafting.
But the thing is, when you're talking about like, okay, how can we sucker a team like that? Almost never happens. So, but I do think I think
it would require like some kind of restructure and then trade him for like a 7th rounder.
Yeah, and the lack of like commitment from Gutekunst to like because he was pretty committal to like, yeah, we want Aaron Jones back, and then they asked him about Bakhtiari. He's like, well, we're still looking at.
Is pretty. He's got a long way to go.
Yeah, no, that was not a yes, is what it was. But anyway, who is the other?
That was a resounding yes.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I think they probably move on from Bakhtiari, but it is a complete what storm, and we'll be covering all of that throughout the offseason. So keep listening. And then who is the other one? It looks like you got one more on here.
I think this is not a salary cap. This
is a
casualty.
Not good at football dump
because I think it basically comes out to Royce Newman is already entering the last year of his contract. His cap hit is small. There's barely over $1 million. So any replacing will have a cap hit that's similar. So you're not really going to save anything. So this is more about whether he can beat out other players for that spot on the roster, and probably going to draft another couple of linemen, and then how much development they get from like Caleb Jones and Luke Tenuta.
Yeah. And I totally could see it because it seems like he's been kind of passed by on the depth chart by a few players. But Dad, I guess let's wrap things up here. How would you rank the needs on offense going into this next season?
So I put interior offensive line first.
Mm-hmm. I did as well.
So that depends on what?
I did as well. That was my number one as well.
It depends a little bit on how much you trust Walker or Bakhtiari to play left tackle next year.
I still think interior offensive line is number one. But go ahead. My number 2 is running back.
See, I have like interior offensive line first and tackle second and running back third. In part because I feel like you can get a good starter in like the 4th round.
Yeah, no.
If you want to get a starting quality like center or guard or tackle, the Packers have kind of mostly
been pretty good at that. But I'm not looking at the needs in terms of amount of capital to spend on. I'm just talking about like how much they need
what the roster looks like.
And for me, it's interior offensive line because I think like if in 2024 like the tackles are Walker and Tom, like we saw this year, that's tenable. Their improvements on the interior line. Like I don't think Sean Ryan for a whole season. I don't know if that's tenable. Josh Myers has only got 1 year left on his deal. And I think that's a place where if you're looking to contend next year, you need to make an improvement there. So I got interior offensive line first. I got running back second. We saw this year Jones, was hurt for large stretches, and the running game was non-existent. It was a 0. So you need another running back, in my opinion. And then third, I got tackle because I do think, Walker is a good tackle. He's solid, but you want better than solid at left tackle. And then I'm not even going to list tight end and receiver because I don't think there's even anywhere to play these guys if you drafted them. So
I think the only thing I'd say for tight end is if they want to get like a real
fullback type,
a real blocking tight end.
Oh, okay. I think a fullback type if they wanted to.
I suppose
I could be convinced.
Maybe that could go in the running back group.
Fair enough. But anyway,
but yeah, I definitely think they need to draft an offensive line in the first or second round.
Possibly. I think it depends on it always depends on who's there.
It'll depend on who's there, right? Whether it makes value for the pick, though. Maybe I guess we'll see who's there when they trade out of the spot.
And
they'll trade out of the spot when there's somebody there that everybody wants.
I think they like Myers a lot more than we do. Is the other thing. I think they really like Myers. I don't know why, but they really like Myers. It seems. But yeah, so I guess we'll see. But anyway, we'll be covering all of that the rest of this offseason, talking about the draft. We'll still be doing an episode a week. We're talking about free agency, the draft, et cetera, everything else that comes up. Thank you so much for listening to our big offense pod. This is officially closing the book on 2023-2024. So thank you for sticking with us for this season. We appreciate it so much. Like we said earlier, give us a follow on Twitter at FatherSonPacker if you like what you heard. And then subscribe to us on your podcast platform of choice, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. We're in all those places. We appreciate you so much for listening. We're really excited to start talking about the draft. We'll be doing mock draft Mondays on our Twitter every single week, so keep an eye out for those. But yeah, thank you so much again for listening. And until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.